If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. In this episode, we have author Eugne Bacon. Diane, how are things going with you?
Oh man, Alan, I am head down in deep deadlines right now. I am so busy. Game of Thrones comes up again in less than 2 weeks. I'm working on a Kickstarter for the next 2 books in the Toy Soldier saga. I'm going to release them both at the same time. And I'm recording an audiobook of the first one so I can fulfill the first Kickstarter completely. So, yeah, I'm having a good time, but I'm a little overwhelmed. How are you?
Oh my gosh, that sounds way more wild than everything I'm going through. Are you actually doing the voiceovers yourself?
No, I've got my partner Jamie is doing the voice reading for the first book, and I cannot wait for this to come out. He's amazing. But I'm sitting with him and directing him, right? So it's like, yeah, it's fun.
Your relationship is strong.
Yeah, it is. Actually, we enjoy working together when we can line up things so that we can do that. This gives us an opportunity. We're having some fun with it. So yeah.
Super cool. So we've been talking about my ADHD a lot here in the beginning, and I will say I've officially started ADHD meds. So that's what's happening with me right now.
Oh, how's that going for you?
Wow, life is so different now. Are
they helping then?
Yes, amazingly.
Excellent.
So much of my anxiety is gone. I'm able to focus so much better.
Cool.
I'm able to remember things better. Pretty much everything is improved. The only bad thing is my sleep has been total garbage right now.
Oh dear, yeah, I can relate.
Yeah.
Well, it'll probably settle out in a little while, so I'm given to understand. So awesome.
Yes. So it's kind of funny. I just recently got my prescription changed a little bit because apparently I metabolized this particular chemical at like an incredibly slow pace. The psychiatrist is like, I just can't even. He's like, 6-year-olds metabolizes faster than you do.
Wow.
And he's like, I just am not understanding. I was like, I don't know. I just have a weird body. What can I say?
That's bizarre. Yeah. So
yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah. So that's what's happening with me right now. Are you ready for our interviewee?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we'll be right back with Eugne Bacon. Okay, and we are back. Eugne Bacon is our guest today. She is an African-Australian author of several novels, prose poetry, and fiction collections. She's a 2022 World Fantasy Award finalist and was announced in the honor list of the 2022 Otherwise Fellowships for doing exciting work in gender and speculative fiction. Her short story release, Dang the Black Thing, received a 2021 Otherwise Award honor as a sharp collection of Afro-surrealist work. Recent books include Mage of Fools, which was a novel, Chasing Whispers, short stories, and An Earnest Blackness, which is a collection of essays. Eugne has 2 novels, a novella, and 3 anthologies out in 2023. Oh my God, that is a lot.
Busier than me. Awesome.
Those include Serengeti, a novel, and a U.S. release of Dang the Black Thing. Visit her website at eugenebacon.com. That's EUGENBACON.com. And Twitter feed at Eugne Bacon. Welcome, Eugne.
Thank you so much, Alan and Diane. I'm so delighted to be here today.
And we're super excited to have you.
We are.
I feel like you're one of those people that every time I turn around, I'm seeing your name pop up these days.
I've been really fortunate over the past few years to really see my rise in visibility. And that's because of publishers and editors who have been really good at highlighting the work of Black writers. And so I'm talking to you today from Melbourne in Australia. And to begin, I'd just like to quickly say an acknowledgement to country. And so I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations, the first storytellers, and traditional owners of the land we live in, the Wurundjeri and Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders, present and emerging, to any First Peoples listening, and to the elders of the land. And so just quickly about me, I am African Australian, and it took me forever to be comfortable to see myself as an African Australian, because I think I was trying to be African, I was trying to be Australian, and I just wasn't comfortable with myself. But it reached a point where I just accepted that I am a sum of many. And what am I? I am a writer, I am an editor, I am a scholar, I am a mother, a sister, a daughter, a reader. I love reading. I'm a friend. I'm a professional editor. So I always wear multiple hats. I'm writing a scholarly article or a scholarly book, or I'm editing something, or I'm writing my own fiction. And I write across forms. I write short stories, novels, novellas, prose poetry. I really love prose poetry because there's so much you can do with it.
And I definitely want to talk about that a little bit, because your work is how I would describe very literary in a lot of ways, very poetic. Even your more straightforward work can tend to be that way as well. But before I get to that, I kind of want to ask you about your origin story. You're doing all this stuff, right? But how did you start doing all this stuff? When did you decide that you wanted to become a writer?
Yeah, so I've always had a very curious mind. I always loved reading. And I was very fortunate because my father was very well traveled. And every time he traveled, he'd come back with a book because he understood my passion for it. Or if I did well in school, he'd give me a book. So I grew up reading stories like Why Does the Zebra Have Stripes? Or how the crocodile got to live in the water. And then you know that African culture is full of storytelling. And so if I did anything wrong, instead of my grandma speaking to me badly or smacking me, she'd say, let me tell you the story of the naughty hyena and what happened to her hind legs. And of course, you'd sit and listen. And so I just always loved reading. And so when years ago, when I lived in London, I was on maternity leave. I'd just had my son, and I'm not the kind of person who can twiddle their fingers. And so I looked up and I discovered this online writing course where they sent you assignments and you sent in stories. And then there was a short story competition. And I sent something in. It was about a writer who was really struggling and trying to make it through. And they're having a really bad relationship with their partner. And I think I was really writing myself into that story. And it won the competition. And I realized that maybe I do have something here. And so that's how I started writing. And then when I came to Australia, I was doing a master's course in writing, and it was very similar. So you had to learn to make your work public, because every assignment, you had to post it online, and two of your peers had to give you feedback, and you had to give them feedback. And I could just tell from the feedback that I was getting from people that I probably have something here. And I started getting published in journals and other publications, but mostly short stories. And it's only years later when I was doing my PhD, and it was one of the PhDs by, you have a creative artifact and a dissertation. And so the creative artifact of it was Claiming Timor, which was my very first novel. And I shopped it around for a bit. I had so many rejections until one day this publisher just wrote to me and said, I just want to let you know that I'm reading this, and I really want you to tell me, is it still available? And you could see from the passion that she really, really loved it. And this was Meerkat Press. And I said, it's all available. And then within that same weekend, she wrote to me with a contract saying she really loved it. And that was the beginning of my journey.
That's so awesome. And I'm pretty familiar with Meerkat. I've done some reviews for them, and they send me things from time to time. Great folks. That's so cool.
Yeah, no, Trisha was amazing. And I tell you, I'll just warn you in advance, do not say anything bad about claiming Timo because she will come at you. Like she loves it even more than I do. And that's the kind of publisher that you want. You know, they throw the kitchen sink at it. And she was my really best experience. Like she set that margin and I knew what to expect from a publisher.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. So, we were talking earlier about how you write and how it's very literary. It sounds like you kind of started out with more of a literary style. Is that accurate? And
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's totally accurate because I've always loved literary fiction. And so when I stumbled upon Toni Morrison, I fell in love with her writing. Like she's the kind of author who could write about bins, write about stones, and you would be enchanted, completely engrossed. And I always loved her work, and like Michael Ondaatje, and there are also some Australian writers. I just really love that rhyme and rhythm and just the poeticity in the text. And I think part of it is also because of my culture. The African language is almost sing-song. If I talk to you in Swahili, it's almost like I'm humming. It's like habari nzuri, and that's just a greeting. Hujambo, si jambo, watoto hawajambo. How are the children? Oh, hawajambo. You know. So that rhythm always works for me. And so that's from literary fiction. Like initially when I was writing short stories, some of them were mostly along the literary path. And then I discovered speculative fiction. And I think for me, what speculative fiction does is it offers a place for me to feel safe because I was talking about my hybridity where I was trying to be African, trying to be Australian, and there were so many things I wasn't comfortable with myself about. But in that curiosity, I discovered that my writing could become like a search. It could become a question. You know, I could approach the compositional space with that urgency. I could write myself in. And speculative fiction allows you to do that. You don't have to ask what color are my characters? What language do they speak? They could be any color. They could speak any language. It's all about the world building and how you bring the reader along that journey.
That's really beautiful. What is it about like speculative fiction do you think gives you that license to explore?
I think because of my own hybridity, I sort of mirror that hybridity into speculative fiction. And when I start writing a story, I don't tell myself that this is a fantasy story or this is a horror story or this is a science fiction story. All I know is that I have the beginning of a story and it's coming at me with such urgency. I have a protagonist, and sometimes I just have a skeleton of what I want to write. I'm not quite sure where the story will take me because it's experimental and I can approach it with intensity and immediacy. And that's what speculative fiction does it for you because the reader doesn't have to approach it asking, is it fantasy? Is it science fiction? Is it horror? You don't have to adhere to those rules. I just write and it's the fluidity of the writing and that way I can explore things. I can write stories of longing, stories of belonging. I can look into migrant stories and just extrapolate. I think I write my feelings or I really absorb the environment. And so during the pandemic, most of my stories had a lot of the characters were looking for something or they were going through some sort of trauma. And, you know, with climate action, it's very rife in my mind. And that's why my novel, Major Fools, really focuses on climate action.
Right.
Yeah, and I write lots of stories of belonging and othering because I've felt like an other for a long time. And so it's either about characters who are trying to identify with that other or they're trying to belong in some way and how they work on that, what they do with it. It's the characters surprise me with their solutions. And sometimes the story is it's a question. And then towards the end of the story, you realize that you don't really have an answer to the story, but you have a different kind of question, and that could inform another story.
That's awesome. I agree with you. I think that's one of the big strengths of speculative fiction too, that,
Yeah.
let's chase the question. Let's try to find solutions through a thought experiment almost, right? So that's excellent.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really all about the world building. And you'll find that in my stories, they tend to be very character focused. And so, although there's the world building, especially where they're Afrocentric stories, and I'm building these Afrocentric worlds, it's really about the character and their quest and their relationship with themselves and their relationship with other people and their relationships with things. I'm very, I think I'm a very relationship person. And so that character is so important.
Awesome.
You touched on so many things I want to talk about. You touched on your writing style. You touched on climate action. You've touched on being othered and trying to think how I want to take this. Let's talk a little bit more about how you got into science fiction and fantasy and genre and stuff like that.
The funny thing is, one of my first encounters was with George R.R. Martin, and it was years ago when he was writing short stories, and they were, I think, on this website called Fiction Wise. I think it was. I can't remember too well, but basically, you subscribe to it, and you could download stories for like 50 cents, even cheaper than that, and you could get bundles, and every time you had the Hugo, the Nebula nominations, they'd be there for a discount on that site. And so one of his first stories that really touched me was, I think it was The Song of Larendor. And there were other stories. I think it was one called The Ice Dragon. I can't remember too well now, but it was his language and just how he wrote his stories. And I was really absorbed. And then I read some Harlan Ellison stories. And at that time, I hadn't discovered Octavia Butler yet. I only discovered her a lot later. But that was my first introduction to science fiction and fantasy and horror, and also to speculative fiction. And I almost feel that speculative fiction was something that I wanted to own. I wanted to write a story that didn't adhere to this canon or that didn't adhere to these rules. And I understood that it's a risk because the readers might reject it. But all I wanted was to write a story that was flexible and fluid, and it could go anywhere that the character chose it to go, and it could have technology in it, or it could have magical realism in it. It could have African spirituality in it. And that's how I got into it, but also through that reading, lots and lots of reading. And I discovered that there was certain types of stories that didn't really work for me. I didn't like highly technical stories that were mostly just about the technology, and there were no bones to the story. And most of the hard science fiction stories were that way. And so I didn't really fall in love with them unless you had a really exceptional writer who could then weave some character and personality into their story. But I loved fantasy because fantasy is beautiful in its own right. And then when you make it dark fantasy, when you explore the darker natures of creatures and humans and all this, it just, you can go so many places with it.
That's some fascinating stuff. I never would have guessed George R.R. Martin. It was a big influence on you in 1,000 years. Let me just say that.
Oh my God. Yeah, he wrote such amazing short stories. And I remember reading them and rereading them and really savoring them. And they were just amazing. And those were the kind of stories that I read, mostly because of the poeticity. He had a lot of rhyme and poeticity. I think probably now other people write his work for him. But then, like when you discover authors at the time when they're not big and famous, it's almost like you're discovering them at their core. And he has something. He's definitely a very good writer.
Yeah. I think Diane's probably more of a George R.R. Martin reader than me.
Yeah.
I honestly have probably read one of his short stories, and I think that's it. And I couldn't even tell you which one it was.
Probably Sand King, since that's the famous one. But yeah,
I have not. That's actually on my to-read list.
Go read that. What is the matter with you? Go read that. Yeah. No, I totally get actually what Eugen is saying, right? Like, he's got a way of bringing out character and environment and the emotional timbre of the issue through subtle cues without banging you over the head with it. It's pretty amazing what he can do with just a sentence of suggestion. So I totally understand where she's at with that. Yeah.
It's this short story that I remember most vividly was The Lonely Songs of Larendor. And I think it was even reprinted in Fantasy Magazine. So if you Google it and just put G.R.R. Martin, The Lonely Songs of Larendor, it's one of the most beautiful, heart-wrenching stories you'd ever read. And then I think there was also Ice Dragon. And this one is about a girl who forges a connection with an ice dragon. And it's actually very dark, but it's also very beautiful. It's one of the most powerful stories I've ever read.
Yeah.
A lot of your fiction does tend towards the dark now that you bring it up. What do you feel that darker side brings to your work in the world?
I think when you write dark fiction, there are different elements to it. One of it is that we do have this curiosity. It's almost like a morbid curiosity with a dark. Like that's why we read stories of serial killers. That's why we read stories of, the worst possible nature of mankind. And then, so that's one part of it. The other part of it is like you're almost not quite conditioning, but you're using it to I'm looking for the word, not let me just use conditioning for the moment, but you're interrogating that which you fear. And so if I am petrified of death and I write a story that really explores death, so in a way I'm hardening myself against death. And so by familiarizing myself with it, with death and with ghosts and with creepy, slimy, wriggly, wormy, snaky things, it sort of helps me to be able to accept them or to understand them better. And then the other part of it is actually dark fiction is an expression of our real world. You're actually bringing the real world. Like your story is more realistic because that's what life is. It's not all lovey-dovey. Horrible things happen to innocent people. Terrible things happen to children. And your story could be a warning. It could be a caution by writing it in such direness. And that's what I do with some of my stories, like The Failing Name, which is a really sad, awful story. It's a little girl who's a migrant from Africa. Her parents give her away to go and live in Paris. And she's there with her auntie who takes the most advantage of her, and the auntie's boyfriend who takes terrible advantage of her. And so this girl discovers magic, and it's her way. Like you don't torment the character to no end. You give them something, and so through this magic, she can create a friend. And those are some of the stories. Sometimes you break the circle of silence by talking about it, and that's why some of my stories are really dark. And people say, "How could you write a story like The Failing Name?" But I write it because that's the visibility that it needs. Terrible things happen to migrants and migrant children, and that's the right visibility.
Thank you for that. I needed that today.
Yeah.
I needed that today. A darker story breaks the circle of silence. I like that very much. I tend to write a lot of dark themes in my own work, and I've been taken to task for it. And that's my answer too, right? Like, if we don't talk about it, how are we ever going to deal with it? If we don't discuss it, how are we ever going to face it and maybe fix it, do something about it, improve lives for people,
That's right. And writing such stories can also be an escape. It can be cathartic because by writing about it. You're tackling your fear by the horns, or you're tackling somebody else's fear by the horns. And if that story can connect with just one person, then you've achieved something.
I love it. And I'm so glad that you brought up The Failing Name too. I really wanted to talk about that story specifically. So this is your story that's been nominated for the World Fantasy Award.
That's right. And I had no idea. If I tell you the number of rejections this story got, you wouldn't believe it. And so
Oh
I
yeah, I
really
would.
felt, I know, so many. I'm actually having a good laugh because I'm thinking of all those publishers who declined it. And then Fantasy Magazine was the very first who showed very big interest in it. And Ali Sog is just, he's a dear heart. And so
Mhm.
he loved the story. And when he accepted it for Fantasy Magazine, one of the questions that come up are like, how did you get started on this story, and how do you collaborate with a person? And I find that I have collaborated on a few works with a few authors, which probably says something about me. I can work with people, and like collaboration is about trust and it's about respect and it's about that mutual, you work together, and that's why it's called a collaboration. And so I'd come across Seb Dubinsky through Meerkat Press, and I'd read his City State series, and I really loved his the way he writes. Like he writes like a bullet. He's in, he's out. He doesn't linger.
Yes.
And some of his
Yes.
chapters are like half a page or a quarter of a page. Like he
Yes.
just writes and it's done. And I thought, you know what, this might be really interesting. And I knew that I wanted to write an African migrant story. But I thought, what if it was Afro-Francophone? And the one person that I thought who speaks French well was Seb. And so when I contacted him with this story idea, he was really happy. And I said to him, what if I start the story and then you finish it? And so you're just going to get it blind. You don't know what story it's going to be. And so I wrote the story. And he sat on it for quite a while because he's a procrastinator. And then he he wrote to me and he said, you know what, I don't want to blackface this story. I don't want to write something that is not my experience. And so what do you think if I take the story if I give it a different slant, like and so what he does towards the end, you can almost see how the story shifts. And his is a really small section towards the end, but he puts himself into the other character that's not the black protagonist, and he speaks from the inside out, and that really works so beautifully. It's like that shift in voice just absolutely works with the story, and then it comes back again to the black character, and that's what made him comfortable, and I could understand that.
Wow, that is awesome. A few things to say here. First of all, I love Seb's work as well. And you described it perfectly, like a bullet and straight to the point, but there's still subtlety there, you know?
Yeah,
Good stuff.
yeah. And so the main character, Jolaine, she goes to Paris as a young girl, but she has this yearning, she has a longing. She wants to rekindle and discover that childhood that she has lost. And there's this boy that she met, and she can't remember his name too well. Is it Alain? Is it Davan? Is it Revlan? Is it Yavan? Like it comes and goes, and that's why it's called the failing name. And so it's through that experience that she can recreate this boy in her tragic situation in Paris. And she wants more from him. And that's how the story gets darker and darker, because she's built this memory of this boy, but what she recreates is not the boy as she remembers him. Yeah.
Yeah. And I gotta say, it's a difficult and disturbing story. It really is.
It is, because it starts with a near rape. And actually, when I wrote the story initially, it was almost like a rape started to happen. And then I could see from the rejections, this was making publishers really uncomfortable. And so I changed it in such a way that Jolaine saves the boy from a rape that almost happened. And it is in that they form that relationship, that childhood innocence. And it only lasts for like overnight, and then he's gone. But that memory stays with her all through her life. And that's why she yearns to recreate him.
You talked about collaborating with Seb a bit, but collaborating in general, I've noticed you have 3 or 4 stories, I believe, in Dang Black Thing where you collaborate. Do you enjoy? Do you like seek out collaboration? And what's it like with other authors?
Yeah, so I do seek out collaborations, and usually it's with an author I'm already enchanted with. And so years ago, when Amazon was doing Amazon Shorts, and that published a few of my short stories, I read a story by this American author Edon Harp, and we've never met. And we've written a few stories together. And so a couple of them, Damn Black Thing, actually the theme story in the collection is by Edon Harp. And there's another story also, it's based on a machine. Actually, that's Damn Black Thing. There are a few stories that we've written together. And so there's one also about Idi Amin, where we recreate a story where Idi Amin gets his punishment, but he's in the US. And so I needed somebody who could write in that southern drawl. And that's what Edon Harp could bring. Like he did southern talk really beautifully. And you could read the story, and he's actually even he's narrated Dung Black Thing for a UK anthology. It's a charity anthology for cosmic roots and eldritch shores, and he's done it in such a way that you can just literally hear how he says it. And so that's how I got started with Edon Harp, and we've never met, and our age differences are so immense. Like he's more elderly, and he's had his wisdom. He comes from the music background. And then with Seb Dubinsky, that was from Meerkat Press. And then Andrew Hook is someone else that I've collaborated with. And he's just amazing as a short story writer. So he's what you call a slipstream writer, which was a very big thing in Europe. So he's a European writer. It's almost like the literary strange or the literary weird. But you write it in such a convincing way that you bring the reader along. And so I was published by Newcon Press, and that's how I get to know people, through the publishers. And I read one of Andrew Hook's collection, Frequencies of Existence, and I fell in love with it. And I got in touch with him. I did an interview with him for Aurealis. And the more I learned about it, it was almost like sapiosexuality. I was in love with his mind. And it came to a point where I said to him, would you like to write something with me? And so we wrote one short story together. And that was fun. It was like love at first sight. Writing a short story with someone, especially when you don't plan it, is so exciting. And then we said, maybe later, let's try to do something longer together. And the novel was a whole different experience, because writing a novel with someone is like marrying someone, and you realize they have farts and bobs and, and they have what's on their faces, and you don't want to see them naked.
Yeah, and you're and like, so, I really don't like the way you use that dangling participle.
Like when we started writing it, I was thinking, where is the short story writer, Andrew? Come on, give me that person. But it also made me realize that it's very easy for me to switch from short story to novel, because the way I write my novels, how I write my short stories, I actually embed short stories into my novels. So they have that intensity, that immediacy, and then I layer the story. And so like a chapter could actually be a short story on its own, with its beginning, with its middle, and its end. Whereas the way Andrew Hook was writing the novel was, he just goes through a whole mind shift, and suddenly he wants to explain more. He wants to build it. He wants to, to do things that I wasn't familiar with the story. But after a few trials, we got it right, and the story really began to work for us. But you can almost see the shift, because the story, Secondhand Daylight, which is a time travel novel, is in two parts. In one part, you have a character, Green, who's a white guy, and he's traveling into the future, and he doesn't know why. And so this is the one where we really fumbled initially, and we actually had to change it from third person to first person, because every time we sent it out, we always got feedback, I'm not quite connecting with Green. And so we changed that. But when we got to the next character, who is Zada, so she's traveling from the future, coming backwards in time, we'd already got each other, and you can see the synergy. Like everybody reading it would say, we really connected with Zada, which means that by then Andrew and I had really forged that strong partnership. But it made me realize that honestly, writing a novel with someone is a whole different cup of tea.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about story structure, and I think you started to kind of talk about it a little bit when you were mentioning that you like to write short stories within your novels, right?
Yeah.
But you play with story structure so much more than most authors that I've read. You jump perspectives a lot, you jump points of view a lot, which is a little more normally accepted Some of your stories are just like not chronological, it seems like.
Yeah.
And others really like meander in ways that you would just not expect. Can you talk a little bit about some of the different story structure techniques that you use and what you're hoping to convey with those?
I don't even approach it with a mindset knowing that this is the story structure I'm going to apply. I think what happens is that I am the kind of writer who really falls in love with writing. I love playing with text. I love that curiosity and that experimentation. For me, writing is playfulness. Even when I write the most somber topic and I'm actually sobbing as I write it, I'm typing on the keyboard and tears are dripping, but it's still that play still comes into it. And so I love experimenting. I find that of the most perspectives, I love the you narrative, which is the second person, but it's actually second person, first person. And so it's almost like you have an omniscient narrator who is talking to the protagonist. And so it's not really talking to the reader, but it's like you're seeing what this omniscient narrator is seeing in the second person. And so that's one form that I really love playing with. And sometimes I could write a story in third person and I just don't feel it. And so I've had experiences where I've actually I've changed the whole story. There's one where I wrote it and the protagonist was female. And I thought, you know what? What if this protagonist is male? And no, actually, it was different. The protagonist was male. And I thought, what if I take all these characteristics of the male character, but make this character a female? And suddenly the story was much stronger because this was a bold woman who was doing things you don't expect from women. And she was gay and just everything that came out from her. She was hardcore and she was a detective. And it's one of the stories that I most connected with because I loved this character, all just by shifting the gender and then looking at it from a different gaze. And because I love prose poems, I write prose poems. Sometimes I could begin a story with a prose poem, or I could immerse prose poetry into my writing. And so when you read my latest novel, Serengoti, which is a literary mystery, it's a very different kind of literary story. And it integrates so much. Like some chapters actually finish on a prose poem. Some of the characters are very stylistic. So it's both rhythmically and visually beautiful in its arrangement. It doesn't have that structure that you would expect from reading a page of prose because it could be layered in different ways and it could finish in a way that's so different, maybe even without a full stop. Just you have maybe a slant of characters going downwards towards the margin. And so it's that play, that experimentation, and I think it feeds something in me. So I actually am a very selfish writer because I write first for myself. And so it's about what the text is doing to me, what they're writing, the story, the character, what they're doing to me before then, what are they going to do to the reader? And if any reader connects with it, and I think most do because reading the reviews of my work, I can see that people are really connecting with that whole different approach. I am happy.
Yeah, and do you mind if I give a couple examples?
Yes, go for it.
You have one story, and I may mispronounce this. Is it Messier 19?
Messier 94, yes.
Messier 19.
So Messier 94. So this is the one that I wrote with Andrew Hook, which is very different as well. And so we experimented together.
Yeah, and you end the story with a double, maybe like triple metaphor, the way that I viewed it, a symbolic metaphor. So it ends with these double X's, right? Yeah. And to me, they were like the dead eyes that you see on a cartoon. But it also relates back to like the previous two sentences as well, and is a metaphor for two previous sentences. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, thank you. And we didn't even plan it because writing with Andrew Hook was very spontaneous. He would send me a chunk of text and then I just read it and then continue from there. And so it was almost like you're writing from the gut text. It was just like that instinctive reaction or response to the text. And I've done this before in prose poetry, where I wrote a collection with Dominique Heck, and it's one where she'd write a prose poem, and I'd look at it, and the immediate things, the instinct that I felt on reading her text would inspire this response that could be anything. And as long as it touched or hinted at something within her text, and then I took it somewhere different, and she would do the same. So that really works for me. I love that creative element, being able to play with text and do things with it, and just express myself in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Are you a big fan of E. E. Cummings by any chance?
I don't think I've read any of their books, no.
Okay, so E. E. Cummings is a poet, and a lot of his work is really like playing with the structure of the punctuation and almost kind of like a meta narrative around the poem itself. You should definitely check him out. E. E. Cummings, Cummings. So much of your work reminded me of stuff that he's done, and I discovered him in college, and he's just a huge influence. And so many of my notes to your books are like, this reminds me of E. E. Cummings. This reminds me of E. E. Cummings. This reminds me of E. E. Cummings. It's so funny. It's so funny.
I love that when that happens. You don't recognize that you have this connection to another writer. You're like, I don't know. I don't know this writer. And then you read it and you're like, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and I think I apply some of that sort of experimental approach in The Failing Name, like even just in the beginning of the story, where it goes, the oval fruit, and even on all sides, even when it's ripe, it's not just for eating. And so you don't know whether the story is going to be about a fruit. And then it goes on, spaces in the dust roads filled with reddish brown wind are what she sees in her lost childhood. Jolaine wants to tell you, to tell anyone who will listen, of hiding in the leaves of a mango tree, witnessing what could have been the onset of an assault. The tree shook with a young boy's shudder, the earth hard on his face, crumbs claying his hair. As the tree sighed with the boy's cry, Jolaine yelled out, Arrête! Stop! And hurled a mango at the man. And that just brings that connection back to the fruit. Just I begin with a text. And then there's a part where Jolaine is going through a really turbulent time, and she wakes with longing. And so this is how the text goes. When Jolaine wakes, the sky is a diamond shimmering with a scatter of white light. In the depth of the room's silence is the rise and fall of his breathing. He's curled tight against a corner, cheeks down on the floor. His eyes are closed. He can't reach her, but their history does. She wonders at his unpolished beauty, the symmetry of his face. She listens to his aroma tucked inside the room. Nutty, musty, hints of mud.
Wow, that's evocative.
Yeah, so
Love it.
This is the first episode we've ever done where I feel like we're at a poetry reading.
I know, right? It's fantastic.
And so you did have a question about dystopian futurisms, and this comes back to Mage of Fools. And so Mage of Fools is a dystopian story, and where you see dystopia is the subgenre of science fiction, and it's the antonym of utopia. And so whereas in dystopian narratives, they tend to be largely pessimistic, they're very pessimistic, but in utopia, you have that idealism. And so in Mage of Fools, which is dystopian, I wanted it to be Afrofuturistic. I wanted to set it in a country that's plagued by climate change. And I actually took the country Mafinga, and Mafinga is a real place in Tanzania, but it's a town, not a country. So in my story, I made Mafinga a country. And when I set out to write this story, I wanted it to be a novel. And usually I don't know whether it will be a novel or a short story, but I deliberately wanted a novel. And I wanted it to have this urgent call to climate action, And I definitely wanted it to have very strong female protagonists in stories of resilience. So they're in the worst possible world where all the men are dead, and it's in the worst throngs of climate collapse, and they're oppressed people in this essence of ujamaa. So ujamaa is a real term for African socialism. And when Tanzania was independent, the very first the President Nyerere, chose to adopt ujamaa, sort of like an African socialism. And its ideal situation, it's theoretically sound, where nothing belongs to anybody, everything is from a shared community, but there's so much potential for abuse, and this is what happens in Major Fools.
Interesting. I thought you wrote beautifully in Major Fools as well, and I was really surprised the lead character there didn't get some comeuppance before the end of the book, because I was waiting. she was given the queen and the advisor some lip, if you will, and she survived it.
It was one of the stories where you think, kill your darlings. Which darling shall I kill? But I just couldn't kill that one.
Right. Yeah. I was waiting. I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be it.
Yeah, no, she had to be the heroine of the story. Yeah, because that was it. It was about female empowerment, this story.
Though, like I was just discussing the other day with a bunch of friends that there's always an exception to every rule in writing. And kill your darlings doesn't necessarily fly. Sometimes, I don't know. I was likening it to the 1978 version of Watership Down, the movie that they made, right? That whole movie was one darling after another. That was people who went to the novel and went, okay, we're going to include every single important event that is like a pivotal event in the novel, and that's going to be the movie, and then we're going to piece it together, and we're going to make every one of these bits beautiful, right? So the whole movie is one. Yeah. I refuse to kill any darlings. Here they all are for you. Right? And yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful when a writer has the confidence to do that with their work. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, and I think coming back to George Martin, Game of Thrones, it went to the most extreme. He was killing all the darlings, and especially the TV version, all of the people that you really wanted to be the heroes, he was killing them off. And it just reaches a point where you really piss off the readers and the fans. What the heck are you doing? Now you're just killing for killing's sake.
And I think that happened. I mean, I think people got kind of started losing their interest in the show, and I think that happened with the Walking Dead as well. Where just everybody was dying. Anybody you cared about just died. You know what I mean? Except for Rick. He did keep Rick around. But.
Speaking of dark and dystopian genre, right? Mm-hmm. This is a danger when you're writing in this genre. It becomes easy to make it too realistic, where there's nothing for the reader to hope for or to identify with in the character, or in the story or whatever it is. Where the show started losing me, I think was season 4, right? I was like, for fuck's sake, can we please give Arya a break? Just one would be nice, And it became hard to make myself watch it for a while after that, because it was like, I just don't want to see any more horrible things happen to Arya. Give her some hope, goddammit. So it's a cautionary line, and it's something we talk about a lot on the show, right? We talk about, we tend to, I think both of us have a bit of a prejudice against grimdark, because it often goes into that too deeply, where you're like, I have nothing to hold on to here, and I want something. Just a glimmer. It doesn't have to be much, but give me something, right? If you do that, then the tragedy becomes more poignant and the horror becomes more horrible. But if you don't do that, then you lose people. That, my opinion anyway. take it with a grain of salt.
It's a very good opinion. I honestly like to think of the author as an agent of change. And so even when I write those really grim stories, I think at the end of it, even if the message is not full in my mind, there is something. It's either a cautionary tale, or it's again that where you give that visibility, breaking that circle of silence. But there's got to be something, and especially when you have young characters, and we live in such a dismal world where you want to give these young people hope, and so you don't just kill and despair them to no end. You've got to give them something, give them some ability where they can defend themselves. It just reaches a, you don't want your reader to be jumping off the cliff, because then you might achieve something, but to what end?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I totally agree. Do you mind if we change gears a little bit here?
Not at all. Not at all.
Before we started the podcast, Eugen, you were talking about how you are editing an anthology right now, and the topic of the hour kind of came up, and that is AI or AI written stories.
That's right. So it's very worrisome, I would say, because I am an editor for British Science Fiction Association and the Fiction Anthology, and this is the third year that we're doing it. And generally, we call out for submissions. And last year we got about 200 submissions, but out of those we could get some really good stories. And this time we've got so many submissions, it's insane. And we opened for just 2 weeks, and over half the stories I could swear are written by bots, because you can read them and there is a complete absence that a human was present. Like something, they're so nonsensical, and some of them have missing cats, ingesting nanites and they become artists. Or you have cockroaches, and they're sucking human minds, and the stories just go to all crazy places. And the really worrisome thing is that in some stories, they're almost borderline, like you're not sure, did a human write this? And I've come to a point where I actually have to look up the authors and, research them to see, do these authors really exist? Because either the story is an absolute fabulous story, or it's absolute bollocks. Like it's so nonsensical that it could either really be a 9 or it could be a 0. And so it just makes you wonder, where are we going with technology? Are we going to reach a point where it's just going to be submissions by invite only? Or is it a point where if you're already an author and you're established, maybe you're laughing a little bit because publishers will trust you, and when you send something to them, maybe they'll read it? Or and this is really, it's a bad way of thinking, because what happens to the new writers? We're meant to encourage them and mentor them and invite them into the industry, because it's not an exclusive industry. But when you're getting all these things from chatbots, it's just insane. And think of the readers. So I am reading through all this absolute bullshit, and so that's wasted time. I could be reading really good stories, but in the meantime I'm filtering out these rubbish stories. And the frightening thing is that this AI is learning. So at the moment, they're rubbish stories. You can actually look at them and say, this is rubbish, a human didn't write this. Maybe the next lot will be even closer to the human story.
It does make it additionally difficult to break in, right? Okay, so I would describe myself as kind of one of the pro backbenchers at the moment, right? I'm a SIFWA member. I've published a few things here and there, right? You may have encountered my name once or twice, but I'm not big cookies by any stretch of the imagination, right? And I have a hard enough time getting people to pay attention to me. It's really because there is this oversaturated market. I mean, already publishing stories is hard, right? I did an anthology where I published and edited. I know how hard it is because there's so few people doing it, and it's so difficult to fund in the current capitalist environment that we live in, that it's already like hundreds of people competing for 20 slots in a book, and if you've been heard of, you're more likely to get in, because a wise editor and publisher knows that sells the book, right? So
Yeah.
I know most of the people I know who are doing this do what I tried to do, which is, okay, we're going to put a couple of names we know people have heard of in here. And then we're going to try really hard to find the new authors, right? And give them a spot.
Yeah.
And because they love the industry, because they care about it, because they care about writing. And but okay, so now we're going to have this additional complication with oversaturation by these bot written stories. For what? What's the purpose? Does somebody think they're going to make money at this? I can tell you from personal experience, this ain't the industry if you want to get rich, man. I can tell you that. Just don't bother, right?
Yeah.
And, and if it becomes more difficult to differentiate, yeah, then how is the new writer going to get in? Because you're right, people are going to go to more invite-only anthologies, and I'm not going to get an invitation, and do we have to resort to crowd publishing specifically? It's the big four already don't want to hear from us unless you're already established. It's really difficult. It's really difficult, and I don't know what the future of this industry is, and I keep worrying about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the industry really has to think of a better way of filtering out stories. So it's either, do you want to filter out stories, or do you make it acceptable that we will allow AI generated stories, but they've got to be good fiction? But it's such a blurry line. And when it comes to anthologies by invitation only, I have read anthologies where the big names did nothing. They're basically just big names, but their work honestly was rubbish. And it was the new authors in the anthology whose works I really connected with. And so you can throw in big names, but because everybody is asking them to contribute something, so they're churning work. It's not quality work, it's just work to exist in an anthology. And that just doesn't cut it. And it's going to be very problematic. And particularly because the people who are sending these bot-written stories, most of them are just spammers. And so they don't even reread the stories. At the moment, they're just rubbish stories. But what if you get a clever spammer who's very careful about how they write their stories? And they're not even writers. They don't care about writing. They just want to write and send it to a competition, or write and send it to an anthology and get money.
I could see them maybe churning out something like James Patterson or Dan Brown, something that's very formulaic, right? But do you think they'll ever be able to churn out something that's, as unique as, something in This Dang Black Thing, or a Seb Dubinsky book, you know what I mean? Or something like that. I just feel like most of the authors that I read and I talk to are just too unique in their style of writing. It's just it's that element of humanness, that unique humanness.
Yeah.
Do you think they'll be able to replicate that?
I think at the moment that's what we're using to filter them out. Like, that human element is very evidently missing, but it's not always as visible. And remember, technology is garbage in, garbage out. It's what you feed into the database, and it's the type of query that you put into it. So what if you feed in Dang Black Thing into the database, and then you put in a very sophisticated query and say, I'd like you to write me an Afrofuturistic story set in Mozambique in the style of Eugne Bacon. And so it can learn. And maybe it will take somebody really clever to look at it and say, this is not Eugene's work, in the same way that you can look at art and say this is not authentic. And sometimes it takes somebody really specialized to know that this is not authentic art, this is a copy. But will publishers and readers care? Will they want to go to that next level to really authenticate the work, that this is, legitimately creative and different? And yeah, it's AI. It's evolving even as we speak. Somebody can show you 2 paragraphs and say, this is story A and this is story B. Which one do you think a human wrote? And you look at it and maybe you can't tell the difference. And that's worrisome.
I agree that a large portion of readers are not going to care at some point. I mean, a lot of people read James Patterson, right? And a lot of people read Dan Brown. And look, I know some of our listeners probably like those authors, but the couple books that I've read by Dan Brown, could not stand them. They were just too predictable, you know?
Yeah, and that's what it might be. Maybe it will work for the commercialized fiction, but then you'll still have your unique authors. Maybe it's going to be like a tattoo. Like when you don't have a tattoo, you're the unique one. So the authors were not using AI and the artists were not using AI. They're the niche ones, the unique ones. And yeah, and maybe there'll come a way of actually really figuring out which are the AI stories and just really ban, like once you're blacklisted, you're blacklisted. So is that a risk that you want to take?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, it's the question of the moment. I'm not sure we have any answers beyond this, right?
Yeah, it's really worrisome, and maybe more
It
so
is.
for artists than it is for writers. Still, writers have something to worry about, but artists, I mean, the type of art that this AI is generating, it's beautiful. It's just amazing. It's staggering to look at, and you know, with text, you can tell the difference. You can say maybe, yeah, this no, I don't think this works, but with art, you fall in love with it instantly. So yeah, what will happen to artists? Will there be some allowance that you can use some level of AI, but just have a disclaimer? What will happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard that exact suggestion by many people. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we are coming up on our time here. So there's a few questions that we have to ask you that we ask everybody. What is bringing you hope right now?
I think the biggest thing that brings me hope is the rise of Black speculative fiction, the rise of African voices. You have so many powerful voices right now, and publishers are listening to them. They're publishing their works. So you have Sui Davison Kumboa, you have Australian writers like Aline Mwezi, Neo Senga, you have writers like, Cheryl Toomey, and so many of them. And it's also about networking. So some of these writers, I'm working with them in a new project called African Voices, where it's about the Afrocentric futurisms in their stories. And so it's a way to showcase their works and also to understand their slanting, because Afrofuturism is a very vexed topic. People have different opinions about it. And so I'm inviting their work and what they can talk about it and which kind of futurism they'd like to slant their work towards. So that's one project I'm working on. And I think I'm very optimistic because from where I started, I used to get so many rejections. I still get rejections, but not as many now. I can start writing something without a target market with the confidence that it will be published, it will find a publisher. It means that I'm more visible now. I am getting invited to more anthologies, which is also a way of understanding that you're slowly getting there, you're getting the visibility. And so that's a good thing. It's giving me hope. But yeah, but I'm getting despair over the chat GPT thing.
Yeah, yeah, totally fair, totally fair. I think everybody is.
Yeah.
What do you have coming out soon?
I do have Secondhand Daylight, which is coming out in October. That's the time travel novel with Andrew Hook. I also have Damned Black Thing this July through Apex. That's the US and Canada edition. And oh my God, the cover is amazing. I tell
Nice.
you, Americans know how to go bold and brush, and it's just superb. And then I have this literary mystery, which is non-speculative. So it's one of the first non-speculative long pieces of work that I've written, and it's just I'm very excited about it. I think it's one of my biggest book yet because it's set in Australia. It's a migrant story that I've placed in a fictitious place in a place called Wagga Wagga, and then the setting itself is in a place called Serengeti, which is a derivative of Serengeti from Africa, and so that's the blend of the Africa and the Australian in it. And it has a gay character who's binary, and so it's very, very different, and it's a very powerful story. I had so much fun writing it. And I was very nervous when I started it because this publisher, Transit Lounge Publishing, published Damn Black Thing. And then from there, every time I sent them something, they said, we don't want short stories and we don't want it to be speculative. And I remember initially I was very angry about it because I was thinking, I am mostly a short story writer and I also write speculative fiction. So why do you want to change me? And then I thought about it, and then I thought, you know what? I'd really love to write a migrant story set in Australia. And so this is what I did. And when I sent it to the publisher, my heart was in my mouth. So first I sent them 10,000 words, and I was waiting for a response. He replied with a contract, and I went, bloody hell, I don't know what to write. I've got only 10,000 words. That's all I got. And it took me forever.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I know. So I had to think about it, and I had to sit on the story and just really think, where do I want to go with this character? And then slowly the story started writing itself, and the character was very strong in themselves, and they were writing the story. And so when I finished and I sent it to the publisher, my heart was in my mouth, and I was wondering, oh my God, what if he doesn't like it? And he replied with just 4 words, the novel is great. And that was it.
Brilliant.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on all of this highlight and success for you. It sounds like it's well-deserved and you've worked really hard, and I'm excited for your future.
I'm excited as well. I don't think I'm there yet. I hope to reach a point where I can actually make a choice, because I do have a day job. I love my day job, and I steal stories for my day job as well. So it's good sometimes to balance that. And I think if I had all the time in my hands, I wouldn't write a single thing. So I've learned to write under pressure. I really know where to steal time and to write my stories. And so hopefully when I get there, then I can make a choice about what to do with my life, and be able to sustain myself through my writing, and to be able to get even more visibility, and get all those $10 million advances to write a story that I don't have.
Yes, that's the dream, right? That's the dream.
Yeah, that's the dream.
So we mentioned it at the top of the interview, but why don't you tell everybody where they can find you one last time?
Yes, you can find me on my website, eugenebacon.com. That's eugenebacon.com, or on Twitter at Eugne Bacon.
Brilliant.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, this was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. It was a wonderful conversation to have, and we've covered so much together.
Okay, and that was our interview. Before we continue on, remember that we have a Patreon. If you want to support us that way, you can find that at patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. If you're not wanting to contribute like that, just rate or review us, share us with your friends, tell people on Facebook and Mastodon and whatever new social medias are out there right now to come and listen to us and share some episodes, That's really, honestly, the best way that you can help us right now.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Diane, tell me.
Yes. What?
What'd you think?
You know what? She was awesome. My favorite kind of interview is the one where I don't say much. I like that. I like it when you get someone on the air that, they're talking about their work. They know that's why they're there. They know that's what people want to hear, and they're willing to share. And the best thing I can do as an interviewer at that point is listen and, maybe throw in a pertinent comment or question here and there. But mostly I really enjoy that. And she's so effective in the way she talks. Like she just absorbed me. I felt like I was listening to a poem. She was drawing me in. It was amazing. I like her a lot.
Oh my gosh. I hope she gets paid to do her own voiceover for her books, because holy cow.
Yeah, definitely. Don't get anybody else to read your audiobook, Eugen. You do it, because damn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. And her language is just so unbelievable. There was one passage I wanted to read. I didn't quite get to it, but man.
I'll tack it on the end of the episode, man. Let people hear it.
Okay, maybe I'll read it right now.
Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? Yeah.
Okay. So here's this bit that I was going to read, because I was talking about E.E. Cummings, and it kind of blows my mind that she doesn't know who E.E. Cummings is, because, man, that was like 50% of my notes. Anyway, here we go. She opened her mouth one last time and released a soundless story of godless beasts shaped in punctuation, but the period was clashing swords with a question mark. At an exclamation point, 2 semicolons braced into an apostrophe that shot ellipses of fire. dashing like dragons, and there was no parentheses, clarity or conviction in the underside of wings. She closed her mouth one last time, and she felt the truth of brackets. Now enclosing they were, and he wondered what was inside the punctuation that remained essential to her narrative. I mean...
Oh my God, that's astounding.
Right? I mean, it's like the description is like a short poem of its own. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then to have that punctuation theme like that, you know?
Huh. Well, that really speaks to me as a writer, I can tell you that. Wow. Yeah, she's so good. Amazing, beautiful, beautiful prose. Just astounding. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, any books that you're reading?
What am I currently? I am finally getting around to reading 2312.
Kim Stanley Robinson?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good?
It's
yes,
excellent.
No?
Oh yeah, no, I really like I like his protagonist, right? Because she is an ADHD mess. You will love it. Yes.
Yes. Well, we both relate to that.
And she's beautiful in her mess. Yeah, it's
ASR is hit and miss with me. I either love his stuff or I'm like, oh my God, can we just stop with this? Why does this have to be like 100 pages? Like, can we just skip this part? You know, like,
right.
I mean, either one or the other with him. You know what I mean?
I'm not finding that with this at all. He's everyone talks about the high concepts in this book. You know, they talk about things like the fact that one of the big premises is that, okay, Earth climate change has gone completely to shit. So what they've done is they've started terraforming stuff out in the solar system. And in particular, they hollow out asteroids and make terrariums out of them, right? And set them to spin so that they have simulated gravity. At varying levels, they may not necessarily choose Earth's gravity. They do different things, right? And that's what people talk about when they talk about this book. I think they're missing the point. I think they should talk more about the characters, because there's like a protagonist and like a secondary protagonist, right? And they're both very different and very interesting people. And just the complexity of the way people, like who they are, has developed in this unique society is fascinating. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I think I'm about halfway through. So
nice.
Great book.
Nice.
What about you? What are you reading?
Oh, what am I reading right now? I am reading two really cool things. I'm reading Kindred by Octavia Butler.
Oh, is this the first time for you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll just shut up then. Brilliant book.
I am about 25% in. Slight spoilers here, folks. She's been back and forth a number of times, and then this is the first time her husband is back, is where I'm at.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, yeah. We okay. I want to be Octavia Butler when I grow up, okay? There. I think she's amazing. Everything I've ever read by her is genius. So I hope you enjoy it. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yeah, this is my first novel by her. I did read one of her short stories years ago. The one about the aliens that are like, the people that are impregnated with the aliens and then they like burst out of their chest. You remember that one?
Yeah, that would be the Xenogenesis series, I think. No, that's not that one. No, that's the other one.
What's it called?
I know what you're talking about. No. Yes, but have I remembered the name? No, that one was creepy as hell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm reading that, and I'm also reading A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers right now.
Oh, okay. I have not read that.
Nice little novella. They're pretty interesting. They're very cozy, very philosophical in the writing. You know, it's not an action book. It's more about like, what could the future be like, and why are certain things a certain way, and just. But they're very short. They're like it's 100 pages. That's
right.
It, so. You know what I mean? I'm almost done with it, and I've been reading it for 2 days, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
You know? Yeah. So that's what I'm reading right now. Both pretty cool things.
Excellent.
Thanks to everybody for listening. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. As always, we really appreciate your ongoing support. And if there's something you want to see, the best way to do that is join our Patreon, because our patrons get to vote on what they, who they might want us to have on the show and stuff like that. So you can put in some input there, and we'll be happy to talk to people. We like talking to different people. So,
And actually, now that you brought that up really quick, our next guest is Maurice Brodus, and he was a patron pick. So there you go.
perfect.
So thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next time. We are keeping hope alive, one episode at a time. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey and produced by Ken Schrader. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower, additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski, and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Eugne Bacon. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.
Letting